storm season came early to Copper Flats. The old-timers said the clouds had been acting wrong for weeks, rolling in low and fast. Bruised purple at the edges, hanging heavy over the land like they were deciding something. Jack Mercer felt it in his bones. He'd ridden through enough bad seasons to know when the earth was holding its breath. Jack was foreman of the Harlan Ranch, a position earned through grit, scars, and years of listening to the land more than people. He trusted horses, soil, and instinct. Everything else, especially talk of science, sat poorly with him. That was why the woman on the ridge unsettled him. He spotted her late one afternoon while riding fence along the western flats. She stood alone against the sky, dark hair pinned tight, skirts snapping in the wind. She wasn't looking at the town or the cattle or the road. She was looking straight up, studying the clouds like they were a book only she could read. Jack reined in his horse. Folks didn't wander out here for no reason. He watched as she scribbled something in a notebook, paused, then adjusted a strange brass instrument mounted on a wooden stand. When thunder growled low and distant, she didn't flinch. If anything, she smiled. Jack rode closer. "You planning on getting struck by lightning, miss?" he called. She turned calmly, sharp gray eyes meeting his. "Not today." That answer alone told him she wasn't like anyone else. "I'm Jack Mercer," he said. "This land belongs to Harlan Ranch. Storm's coming." "Yes," she replied, tucking her notebook under her arm. "From the southwest, it'll intensify within the hour, but the main cell will pass north of here." Jack frowned. "You sound awfully sure." "I am." She introduced herself as Rachel Hala, meteorologist, though she quickly learned that word meant nothing to him. She explained she studied storms, tracked pressure changes, wind patterns, and cloud formations. She wasn't guessing. She was measuring. Jack had heard enough. "Storms don't follow rules," he said flatly. "They do what they please." Rachel's smile didn't fade. "Only because no one's been listening closely enough." Thunder cracked overhead. Closer now. Jack glanced up, expecting rain, but the clouds held. Minutes passed. Then more thunder northward, just as she'd said. Against his will, curiosity crept in. Rachel asked for temporary shelter to ride out the evening winds. Jack pointed her toward the ranch, still unconvinced but unwilling to leave her alone on the flats. As they rode, she spoke of barometers, temperature shifts, and how storms could be predicted not perfectly, but well enough to save lives. Jack didn't respond much. He didn't need saving, but when they reached the ranch, Rachel stopped suddenly. "You should move your cattle tonight," she said quietly. Jack turned in his saddle. "That herd's been here 20 years. The river will jump its banks by morning." Jack laughed once, sharp and humorless. "River's low." "Not after the rainfall. Upstream," she replied. "The storm north of us will feed it." They stood there, wind tugging at their clothes, thunder murmuring in the distance. Jack had never once trusted a stranger's word over his own judgment. But something about Rachel Halher's certainty, her calm in the face of chaos, gave him pause. By midnight, he ordered the herd moved. By dawn, the river flooded Copper Flats, and Jack Mercer realized the storm season had brought more than rain. By sunrise, Copper Flats was a sea of mud and broken fences. Jack Mercer stood at the edge of the higher pasture, watching brown water churn where dry ground had been the day before. The herd grazed safely behind him, unsettled but alive. If he'd waited even an hour longer, he would have lost half of them. He didn't like thinking about that. Behind him, Rachel Hale knelt in the wet grass, carefully emptying a glass cylinder into her ledger. She worked as though the flood were nothing more than another line in a long equation. Her hair had come loose from its pins, dark strands clinging to her cheeks, but her hands were steady. "How long you been doing this?" Jack asked. Rachel didn't look up. "Since I was 16, since my family didn't outrun a storm in Kansas that stopped him." She capped the cylinder and finally met his gaze. "I don't like being wrong." Jack nodded once. He understood that kind of weight. Word traveled fast in frontier towns, especially when fear was involved. By midday, folks from Copper Flats rode out to the Harlan Ranch, asking questions why Jack's cattle were untouched while their lower fields lay drowned. Jack found himself pointing them toward Rachel, who spoke with calm authority even when men twice her age scoffed at her instruments. Not everyone listened, but enough. Rachel set up her weather station properly that afternoon in the old surveyor's shack near the flats. Jack helped her haul crates, pretending it was only neighborly duty. In truth, he wanted to see how she worked, to understand how someone could read chaos and find order. Inside the shack, she unpacked strange tools, glass tubes, copper plates, parchment charts, marked with dates and symbols. She explained pressure systems using sand and water, showed him how winds curved instead of traveling straight. Jack didn't pretend to grasp it all, but he listened. Later that evening, clouds rolled in, again fast, low, angry. Rachel stood outside, studying their movement, lips pressed tight. "This one's wrong," she murmured. Jack followed her gaze. "Wrong? How?" "It's feeding off the flooded ground. Moisture's trapped. The wind's backing instead of turning." Jack frowned. Meaning, it'll hit harder than it should." They rode out together, warning families along the flats. One farmer refused to move, calling Rachel a nervous fool. Thunder answered him before Jack could. The man packed his wagon within minutes. By the third week of storm season, Rachel stopped sleeping. Jack noticed it in the way she moved slower, sharper, like every thought cut against another. Her notebooks thickened with frantic markings, pages filled edge to edge with numbers, arrows, and warnings written over older notes as though the sky itself refused to be pinned down. "This pattern doesn't exist," she said one evening, standing outside the weather shack with her eyes locked west. "Not here. Not like this." Jack leaned against the fence, arms crossed. "Land's been changing longer than we've been alive." "Yes," she replied, voice tight, "but storms follow rules. This one keeps breaking them." The wind had turned strange warm one moment, biting cold the next. Clouds stacked unnaturally tall, their edges boiling upward instead of drifting apart. Even the animals felt it. Horses stamped and snorted. Birds fled the flats entirely. Rachel pointed toward the horizon. "That system should have moved on days ago. Instead, it's feeding on itself." Jack didn't argue. He'd learned better. They rode town together at dawn, warning anyone who would listen. Rachel spoke plainly, no dramatic language, no fear-mongering, just facts. Rain totals, wind speeds, river behavior. Some listened, some laughed. "You can't measure God's anger," one man spat. Rachel didn't flinch. "No, but I can measure water." By nightfall, the storm arrived, not all at once. It crept. Rain fell steady and unrelenting, soaking the ground until it could hold no more. Wind moaned through the flats, like something wounded. Lightning flashed without thunder at first, silent and wrong. Rachel's barometer dropped so fast she swore under her breath. "This one won't break," she said. "It's stalling." Jack felt his stomach tighten. Rachel looked at him, eyes haunted. Bad enough to change the map. They rode through darkness, lantern light barely cutting through the rain. The river rose inch by inch, then feet. Wooden bridges groaned. Fences vanished beneath the current. When a barn roof tore loose, Jack barely heard Rachel shout before the beam struck. Her horse reared. Rachel flew sideways, hitting the ground hard, disappearing beneath rushing water. "Rachel," Jack yelled. He didn't think. He jumped. The current slammed into him, cold and violent, stealing his footing. He grabbed blindly, fingers catching fabric. He hauled her up, coughing, gasping, her body limp in his arms. Lightning exploded overhead. Jack staggered through the flood, muscles screaming, teeth clenched so hard his jaw ached. He didn't stop until he reached higher ground, collapsing beneath a cottonwood as rain pounded down. Rachel coughed violently, then sucked in a breath. "Easy," Jack said hoarsely, holding her close. "I've got you." She clutched his coat, fingers digging in, as though afraid the storm might take him too. "I miscalculated," she whispered. "The morning after the storm, Copper Flats was quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The wind no longer howled. The river had shrunk back into its banks, and the town seemed to hold its breath, surveying the wreckage. Trees lay splintered, fences were gone, and barns had been reduced to soaked piles of timber. And yet, for all the destruction, life remained stubbornly intact. Jack Mercer rode slowly along the muddy flats, checking the cattle one by one. He had never been more grateful for Rachel's insistence, her strange instruments, and her unyielding certainty. He had doubted her at first, like any man of the land would, but now he understood the power of her knowledge and the force of her will. Without her, Copper Flats might have been another washed-away town lost to the rivers. He found Rachel surveying a partially collapsed barn. She had mud streaked across her face, sleeves soaked, hair sticking to her neck. She knelt and examined the ruin, muttering measurements to herself in a language of numbers, equations, and strange symbols Jack couldn't hope to understand. And yet, he watched her with admiration. She moved like the storms themselves, calculating, precise, relentless. "You need to rest," Jack said, dismounting and brushing mud from his coat. "I will," she replied, not looking up. "After I assess the damage. These barns can't be rebuilt the same way, or we risk the next flood." Jack sighed. He had spent his life working the land, fixing things by hand, relying on experience and intuition. Watching Rachel, he realized there was something more at work. Hera, combination of science and instinct, that he had never trusted fully before, but now could not ignore. "You think the next storm will come soon?" he asked cautiously. She finally stood, meeting his eyes. Her expression was serious, yet there was a glimmer of something softer beneath it. "Storms don't follow a schedule," she said. "But we're safer now than before. We're learning." Jack nodded. He wanted to believe that. More than that, he wanted her to stay. For the first time since the flood, he allowed himself to think of Copper Flats not just as land to be worked, but as home, a place where he wanted to build a life, if only someone would share it with him. And in that moment, standing in mud and sunlight with Rachel Hale, he realized how much he wanted that person to be her. Days passed, and the town slowly recovered. Rachel stayed at the Harlan Ranch, turning the old surveyor's shack into a more permanent weather station. Children came by to watch her instruments. Townsfolk listened to her explanations of clouds, winds, and rainfall. Jack helped when he could, hauling supplies, repairing fences, and occasionally lending his skeptical voice to enforce her advice. The partnership worked, not because they always agreed, but because they had learned to trust one another implicitly. One evening, as the sky bled orange and gold across the western horizon, Jack found Rachel standing alone on the ridge, notebook in hand, hair loose in the breeze. She was studying the clouds again, though this time with a calmness that had eluded her before the great flood. "You've changed things here," Jack said softly, joining her. Rachel glanced at him, eyes tired but bright. "We've changed things," she corrected. "Together." He smiled. "I never thought I'd say this, but I like having storms around. With you here, I feel like we can handle anything." She turned to him, fully then, expression softening. "Jack." He stepped closer, taking her hand in his, feeling the warmth of her fingers against his own calloused hands. "Don't leave," he said simply. "Not now. Not ever." For a long moment, the only sounds were the distant river and the rustling of the trees. Then Rachel squeezed his hand, a small, quiet acknowledgement that she felt the same. Sometimes, storms came to destroy. Sometimes, they came to reveal what was already there. And sometimes, after the sky cleared, they left something stronger behind. Jack and Rachel stood together on the ridge, looking at the town they had saved, and finally allowed themselves to imagine a future, not just surviving storms, but thriving beyond them. The weeks after the great storm passed in a quiet rhythm, the town of Copper Flats slowly returning to life. Fences were rebuilt, barns reinforced, and the river's edges cleared of debris. Life had a way of returning, stubborn and relentless, much like the people who called the flats home. And in the midst of it all, Rachel Hale remained her instruments, humming quietly in the corner of the weather shack. Her journals stacked neatly, and her presence becoming as much a part of the ranch as the cattle and the hills. Jack Mercer watched her often, sometimes from a distance, sometimes while helping her haul new equipment or reinforce the riverbank. He had spent most of his life trusting only what he could see and touch, but Rachel had shown him that knowledge could be just as powerful as instinct. And somehow, in the middle of mud, lightning, and fear, she had shown him something far more dangerous. It was late afternoon when Jack found her standing at the top of the ridge again, wind tugging at her hair and skirt, clouds hung low, remnants of an approaching thunderstorm, though far less menacing than the last. Rachel was jotting down readings, murmuring numbers to herself, and for a moment Jack considered letting her be. But something inside him refused. "You're obsessed," he called lightly, climbing the ridge behind her. She didn't flinch. "And you're curious," she replied, without looking up. "I need to understand this storm before it hits." Jack smirked, shaking his head. "Or maybe you just like being out here with me." Rachel's pencil paused mid-note. She glanced at him, eyes narrowing slightly, lips twitching. "Is that what you think?" she asked softly. "I know it is," Jack said, taking a slow step closer. "You've been studying the sky for months, but I've been studying you." For the first time, Rachel laughed, a warm, melodic sound that cut through the distance like sunlight through rain. "Then, I suppose I've been under observation too," she said, letting herself turn fully to face him. He reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from her face. "We've survived storms together," he said quietly, "and I don't want to survive the rest of my life without you." Rachel hesitated, as though weighing her scientific mind against the pull of her heart. Then, with a decisive nod, she stepped closer, resting her forehead lightly against his. "Then we won't," she whispered. The clouds above rumbled softly, as if approving the union, and the wind carried the scent of rain and fresh earth. Jack held her hands firmly, feeling the tremble of excitement and relief in her grip. For months, they had faced danger, risk, and uncertainty. And now, together, they could face anything the world might throw at them. Storms, floods, or even the quiet challenges of building a life in Copper Flats. In the weeks that followed, Rachel constructed a permanent weather station near the ranch, teaching settlers how to read the sky and prepare for impending storms. Jack worked alongside her, hauling instruments, helping with repairs, and learning to trust not just his instincts, but her expertise. The town respected her now, listening when she spoke, following her advice, and admiring the partnership that had saved so many lives. At sunset, one evening, Jack and Rachel sat together on the ridge, looking over the flats. The sky was a brilliant canvas of orange and pink, fading into violet and deep blue. The river sparkled like molten silver, and the town below was peaceful at last. Jack tilted his head toward her forecast. He asked with a grin. Rachel smiled, squeezing his hand. "Survivable," she said softly. "Together." Jack laughed, leaning close to brush his lips against hers. "Then, I guess we're ready for whatever comes next." And in the quiet of the fading day, with storms behind them and the promise of clear skies ahead, Jack Mercer and Rachel Hale finally allowed themselves to imagine a future one full of love, resilience, and shared adventure. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.